Hello, everyone, and welcome to episode 29 of the Argument Clinic podcast. My name is Martin Sigalo. I'm joined by my lovely co-host, Lawrence Zhao. How are you doing, Lawrence?
I'm doing pretty well.
Doing pretty well. Very nice. How do I go about doing that pretty well?
Sleep until about 2 p.m. in the afternoon.
Don't do that, kids. Be active. Do work. Don't be like Lawrence over here.
Sure. I will say one of the perks of being in college, though, is not having Monday classes, which enables me to sleep in until 2 p.m. on a Monday.
I want to make it vitally clear to the listeners that that being in college is not a sufficient condition for not having Monday classes. It just means that it is possible. I'm just laying on the logical fallacies thick.
It's not even necessary either, because you could just, of course, not be in school. So,
yeah. Of course. Anyway, we're the Argument Clinic podcast. We are designed to be a Lincoln Douglas debate fundamentals podcast for everyone. Whether you're a grizzled veteran of the tournament scene, someone rolling up to their first tournament, someone looking to instruct people in the ways of Lincoln Douglas debate, this is the podcast for you. We are designed to have lessons that are accessible to anyone, regardless of their experience level, things that people can benefit from. Even if you think that you're really experienced, we think that a lot of really experienced people can benefit to this episode. But also, if you're sort of a bright and new thing, if the September-October 2018 tournament, for example, is your first topic, then this is a great opportunity for us to kind of bring you up to speed on a lot of these very interesting subjects. Now, of course, we've had plenty of topics up to this point. For example, last year we had a novice primer episode that we should probably repost, Lawrence. And we have tons of episodes on how to justify frameworks and how to be argumentative, how to be persuasive, etc. And we will do some of the more argumentative stuff here, but we've already covered a lot of ground, so I can encourage you to look at past episodes if you're looking for something maybe not quite the same subject matter as this episode, but you do kind of like listening to it. I recommend checking out our SoundCloud page for past episodes. That's the Argument Clinic, or wherever you get your podcasts. So, where in the world have Martin and Lawrence been? Now, I've been on kind of an academic related grind, doing a lot of work, preparing for the new topic, as well as preparing for teaching at the school that I work at. Now, Lawrence, what have you been doing over the past bit?
Well, let's see. I was at a debate tournament this weekend. I was at the Grapevine tournament, where I was fortunate, enough to judge every single flight of the tournament. That was fun. Yeah, I think that's been about it. That and school is actually now starting to assign homework, so I guess I have to start doing that.
Well, that's unfortunate, Lawrence, that you have to occasionally do work.
It's unfortunate.
All right, so our sponsor, take it away, Lawrence.
Yes. So thanks to Victory Briefs for sponsoring the podcast by providing the equipment and hosting support. Victory Briefs is a summer debate institute and high-quality brief provider. Learn more about their brief products and Victory Brief squads at victorybriefs.com. And make sure to sign up for Card of the Day for either PF or LD, which you can find by going to vbriefly.com and searching for LD card or PF card in the top navigation bar. We literally send you a free card every day into your inbox, so don't miss out.
That is true. I do like free cards, although most cards are free, I think, right?
In the sense that you can just cut them yourself, yes. But if you would like an additional card.
So does it mean free in the sense of like time free?
It is free, yeah, free effort. You just open your inbox and there you go, a cut card with site and tag.
Aw, that's cute. You can assemble a case solely from cards of the day. Here's a challenge to the listeners. Please email us at the Argument Clinic podcast at gmail.com if for some reason you managed to win a debate using only cards from cards of the day.
That'd be quite impressive, given
that would actually be tremendously great. If you could.
Yeah, I don't think there's been enough cards sent out for you to construct a full case on either side.
Are you kidding, dude? You can write a late case with 3 cards.
Oh, you're right.
Anyway, today's episode is one that we've been wanting to do for a while. It is logical fallacies. This is a scholarship episode. We are going to talk about the various kinds of logical fallacies. Debate is, after all, a reasoning activity. We are going to get into all the various kinds of reasoning fallacies, how you can point them out, how you can deploy them in debates, etc. So, without any further ado, let's get into the next segment. This podcast is going to have two sections. The first section is kind of an all-purpose, what are logical fallacies? How would we go about using them? How do we spot them, etc.? Kind of the process-related side of logical fallacies. And then in this big last section, we're just going to go over every logical fallacy that me and Lawrence could kind of come up with and put in a document. And we'll try and really instruct you on the ways to recognize each of those fallacies, how they work, etc. So this first bit, we have what is a logical fallacy? Why do we care about that? How do we spot them, etc. So very first thing is we discuss what are logical fallacies. So Lawrence, question mark.
Oh, that's a good question. What is a logical fallacy?
It is an answer.
Error in reasoning that is evaluated as logically incorrect and undermines the validity of an argument. I think that's the basic point of a fallacy, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So that is yes, it is an error in reasoning. Basically, in debate, you make arguments in support of particular things, and a logical fallacy is when someone constructs an argument badly. So either they, do some sleight of hand to kind of make it seem like they have an argument when really they don't. Or oftentimes it's just really unintentional. People kind of make reasoning errors in debate all the time. Lawrence, of all the cases that you've judged, how many would you say lacked a logical fallacy? Like what percentage?
That'd be, I think, did not have.
Yeah,
0%.
zero fallacies.
0%.
Yeah, I definitely would put that at 0. Like I have now, Lawrence, why do you think that is? Like, why are there so many errors? Not like in debate. Well, I mean, maybe in debate, but I personally have kind of a. I personally I think that I understand why there's so many logical fallacies that exist in arguments, but why do you think that is?
I have maybe 2 reasons, although I'm sure there are more. One is I think the sort of time crunched nature of debates means that it's going to be a little bit difficult to construct truly valid arguments. So philosophy papers are 30 pages long to make a simple claim like killing is bad, because they go through so many different steps in order to reach their conclusion. And in debates, we have just so little time to truly construct arguments that are 100% valid and don't contain a fallacy. And I think the second reason is because kids are strategically incentivized to make arguments that will win them rounds, as opposed to arguments that are in fact without fallacy.
Yeah, I definitely think that captures some of the important details. Mostly, I want to focus on some of that first stuff that you said, but I mostly just think that because in a sense, right, it's not really debaters' fault. I mean, certainly the time pressure contributes to it, but in my opinion, it's just that it's pretty hard to actually make a valid argument, right? I mean, those are pretty on the difficulty scale. Those are pretty high. I mean.
Right.
So much has to go right for you to have a good argument, right?
Right.
And it's so easy for an argument to be bad if just one little thing is wrong with it.
Yeah, and because I mean, there are basic arguments that you can make that are pretty easy to make valid, but anything relatively complicated, like the stuff that inevitably gets talked about in debate rounds, that is difficult.
Exactly, yeah. And another thing is that of the total arguments that you think exist, Lawrence, it's gotta just be a crushing percentage of those are invalid.
Yes, probably.
Right? I mean, just especially because there are oftentimes arguments on both sides of issues, especially on philosophical issues, right? Way more philosophical arguments that have been advanced in society are wrong. Only a couple of them are right, even if you don't know which ones they are.
Right. Although those might be logically sound, just maybe contain false.
They're certainly better in a lot of cases.
Yeah.
Okay, and I think part of the reason also is that it is just, as Lawrence said, you have a great incentive to skip steps in debate, to kind of kind of introduce in a high enough quantity of diverse arguments to really present a threat to your opponent, right? If all you do for 1 minute is make a gigantic logical syllogism, right? where each thing depends on the thing before it, and you're like, yes, it's perfectly valid, right? Then it's just really easy for your opponent to just spend a bunch of time, pick apart at least one of the things. All they have to do is undermine one of those and beat you. So people just have incentive to skip steps. And skipping steps generates logical fallacies for sure. So Lawrence, I wanna ask you a question about what maybe. So we understand what things maybe are errors in reasoning, which is to say leaps in logic, ways that people have constructed arguments poorly. So let's say that someone said that that they believed that okay, so I'm gonna give you an argument. Let's say that I said if I would say if I have sunglasses, then it's green outside. And then I say I do have sunglasses, therefore it must be green outside. Now, let's say that another person came along and they said, well, it's not green outside. It's in fact, blue outside. Sky's blue. Is that a logical fallacy? In the other person's argument, the fact that the sky is blue?
It doesn't appear on face to be. It appears to be an unsound argument because they've made a simple claim: if A, then B. But the problem wasn't like the argument was invalid. The problem was just like the second premise, the idea that B is the case. It is green outside. That is just false. At least that's my thought. It could actually, in fact, be.
No. It was the first one. But you're right. The point is that's not a logical fallacy. The fact that I'm wrong, right? Just because someone is wrong about something does not mean their argument is bad, right?
Right.
So the point is, right? In this lesson, we're going to be going over a bunch of things which are reasoning errors in arguments, things that people will do that are sort of not drawn in a correct way. The arguments just don't make sense. But just proving that someone's conclusion is wrong does not mean that they have made a reasoning error. And we'll sort of draw some distinctions now. We've been using words that I think it might be helpful to explain. So, number one, we want to talk about the distinction between a sound argument and a valid argument. So, Lawrence, what is a valid argument?
A valid argument is one in which if all of the premises are true, then the conclusion must logically follow. So if A leads to B and B leads to C, therefore A leads to C, even if it is not factually the case that B equals C or something like that, the logical structure of that argument is totally valid in that there's not been a reasoning error, and so all of the steps logically follow, and the conclusion therefore must logically follow.
Yeah, exactly. So my sunglasses argument that I made, right, which was if I have sunglasses, then it's green outside. I have sunglasses, therefore it must be green outside. So you described that argument as valid, right?
Yeah.
Yes, it is valid, and that's just because if all those conclusions are true, nothing can follow. If all the premises are true, nothing can follow except for the conclusion. One way to think about it is the premises of an argument are kind of like all the tools that you have at your disposal, all the things that you need, right? And then the idea is those things combine together to create a conclusion. The typical Lincoln-Douglas debate case is exactly this logic, right? So I would say, for example, if morality requires us to maximize happiness. Minimize happiness.
There are some theories that might say that.
Yeah. So if morality requires us to maximize happiness, then we should institute a reporter's right to protect confidential sources. And then someone says, well, it turns out, via my criterion, that we do have that reason to protect happiness. Therefore, the resolution is a true statement. So, to me, that makes perfect sense. Now, Lawrence, a sound argument, in order for an argument to be sound, it has to be valid. And what else?
Right. So an argument is sound if and only if it is valid, which is right that it's impossible for the premises to be true and the conclusion to be false, and if all of the premises are actually true. So it has to be valid, and it has to have all of true premises.
Yes, that's right. So now, of course, there's not going to be any test on this, and to be honest, it's not really even that important that you know this terminology of valid versus sound, etc. But it is important that you understand because we will talk about arguments as being invalid, quote unquote, right? And the idea is that all of our opponents' arguments can be invalid even if their conclusions are true, right? And our arguments can be valid if they're well reasoned, even if we know that some of the conclusions, we have reason to suspect that they're false. So when we talk about an argument being valid, I would basically think of that as being that the argument is well reasoned, that the reasoning and the argument makes sense, that if you looked at it together, it's a nice, neat little logical package. Now, again, in debate, you don't just kind of grant your opponent's reasoning errors. Like if Lawrence was debating me, he would just be like, the fact that you have sunglasses has nothing to do with the fact that it's green outside. Therefore, the premise is false. And then my argument would obviously fall apart, right? But it wouldn't fall apart because I had reasoned it poorly. It would just fall apart because I said something false. Right? Yeah. So in this episode, we're primarily talking about ways that people take things that look to be valid but are actually invalid and put them together. AKA, they take a bunch of things that even if your opponent is right about all the things that they say, maybe that doesn't add up to a good argument. Maybe it still just fails in some essential ways. And that's what we're going to be talking to you about in this episode. So, Lawrence, why do we care about logical fallacies and kind of identifying them, pointing them out? Why is it important?
Well, I guess there's people don't obviously want to make logical errors, I guess. Feel like if debate's a logic / reasoning activity, should probably have some good reasoning, I guess. I am particularly motivated in finding logical fallacies in other people's cases because it makes me feel better about myself.
Right.
I guess. And I'm particularly interested in pointing them out in people's cases that I judge because it makes me sad to see people using poor logic.
Yes, it certainly does. So yeah, I mean, but logical fallacies also, I mean, one of the ways that we want you to think about logical fallacies here is that whether or not you know the names of these fallacies is not really super important to us, right? But the idea is some people go through their entire debate lives without knowing that some of these things are errors.
Yeah, it's actually absurd.
Yeah, so the idea is we think that it will give you a competitive edge against your opponents if you know that some of these things are errors. And another thing is that in some of these debates, saying that something is a fallacy or reasoning error has a certain amount of rhetorical appeal, which means two things. Number one, if you know logical fallacies, that means that you can get an edge on your opponents by saying that their stuff is logical fallacies. But another thing is that sometimes, and actually, Lawrence, you must have seen this, I definitely see this, where someone accuses the opponents of having logical errors that they do not, in fact, have. Or they accuse them of having an error that is not an error.
Yeah.
So that's the thing. If you don't know about logical fallacies, your opponent can sort of bamboozle you in the judge by saying that your arguments are reasoning errors and then kind of, pulling one over on you. Okay, so, but at this point, you all have listened to enough of the episode that I have no doubt that we don't really need to sell you on why it's important to know logical fallacies. Otherwise, you would have turned the podcast off by now.
Yeah, I mean, it is important though, because I taught a module on argument generation at camp, and a good half of it was just being like, if all else fails, just point out some logical fallacies in their case. It's easy and like very effective as a time investment, because like one logical fallacy can really undermine a lot of someone's argument, and it does not take much time to make.
Yeah, especially because one of the ways of thinking about logical fallacies is that like your opponent oftentimes will say a bunch of stuff, and as I mentioned, that stuff will not add up to a real logical argument.
Yeah.
So it's way easier, instead of having to challenge specific things that somebody says, it is certainly easier to just be like, yeah, I mean, I could read some cards about why you're wrong, right? But I don't need to because you just failed in the basic task of constructing a case. And therefore, if I notice that, then the burden is on you to dig yourself out of the hole.
Right.
All right, so so time for some kind of like practical advice. So we have two sets of things before we talk about the specific logical fallacy in the next section. First thing we're going to do is we're going to talk about noticing fallacies. And then the second thing we're going to do is how do you present fallacies in debates? Because it's one thing to know that there's fallacies that exist, and another thing to know or that they have made a fallacy, and quite something else to know kind of how to present that to the judge in a way that is effective and clear. So, Lawrence, what do you recommend as far as noticing logical fallacies? In many ways, I feel like this is one of the hard parts.
Right. So I'm going to give one answer, and I don't think this is going to be nearly close to be enough to answer the whole question. So we'll have to talk about other things. But one of the things that I have gotten in the habit of doing, especially at the beginning of camp, is by making people use an argument tree to break apart some other person's contention or their argument. And so argument trees are just basically just like figuring out which premises lead together to lead to a conclusion. And then you break it off into each premise that you make has its own set of premises and so on and so forth. So like conclusion, a statement like X is good will be composed of two separate, other premises that lead up to that. And each of those premises will have its own premises and stuff like that. And when you map out an argument this way, you're going to notice within, 2 or 3 steps that there's just like a missing argument or missing premise within the claim that they're making. And that's usually where fallacies are going to occur. It's just when there's a missing premise of some sort, like an unjustified leap in reasoning. And so that for me is like the beginner's way to figure out where fallacies are, is just to start getting the practice of mapping things out. And then once you do it a few times, it actually becomes pretty second nature, and you can just start mapping things out in your head. It's gotten to the point where in the middle of a debate round, you can just, map out some things pretty simply and just be like, oh, there's something missing here that is likely going to be a fallacy. I don't really think this is enough to answer the whole question, but this is I think one way to start learning how to notice fallacies.
No, definitely, and that's a really good approach. Now, Lawrence, about that process, what would you characterize the quote unquote end game of that process as? So what is the goal with argument mapping? I obviously know the skill that it's trying to promote, but I just want you to describe someone is in a debate, and they have fully mastered argument mapping, and then someone is making an argument. Are they mapping it out themselves right there on the paper?
Well, I wouldn't recommend mapping it out on the paper, but because that takes a lot of time. But just being able to do it in your head, even if somewhat informally, is useful. And I think there are two main goals that I'm trying to teach when I use this tool in lab. Number one is to point out that there are weak premises or steps in someone's reasoning. And so this is unrelated to logical fallacies, because this is more to do with the content of the premise rather than the reasoning structure of the argument. But it enables kids to figure out where the weak point of an argument is and to attack it, because one argument might sound good until you think about it at its second or third layer of premises and realize, oh, wait, it's based on this very weak claim. And this is a way to help kids figure out where to attack things. But in the purpose of logical fallacies, I think it's pretty easy to start in the middle of your head, to think, wait, this is just an unjustified leap here, where there's just like this missing premise that they just have never warranted or justified or explained in any way. And so that's really those are the two goals that I'm looking.
No, yeah. I 100% agree. And when you are, I guess, let me ask you this question. When you are listening to someone's case, do you map it out and then say, look, an error? Or do you do what I do, which is just immediately know where the error is?
Yeah, I feel like I'm at the point where it's a lot easier for me to just immediately notice the error without having to go through the process of mapping. But that's because I've done it for enough.
Right. And that's the end game, right?
Right.
Yeah. So what I wanted to establish here is that argument mapping, very good tool for learning the way that pieces fit together. I highly recommend it. And I just want you to understand that the goal is, because I assume many people are thinking there, I don't have time to draw an argument tree when my opponent's reading their case, right? But the thing is, the idea is once you do this enough, you won't have to. My personal piece of advice for doing this kind of tree thing um, is to make sure that someone's doing it with you. Make sure that someone's looking over the tree, figuring out things, because unlike in some other areas of debate, misdoing this stuff or doing it without, while you're not supervised is potentially not helpful. So I recommend doing this with someone else. I would say that, again, a lot of this is just listening. Making sure that you're developing kind of appropriate listening skills. But another thing is, and this is the major point that I want to make, when you are listening to someone give their case, the important thing is not to be confused by your opponent's rhetoric. Okay? Kind of the cosmetic features of the arguments, the things that make the argument maybe sound good or make it kind of appeal to you emotionally, may not only be irrelevant to the argument's kind of logical nature, but oftentimes it might hide reasoning errors through kind of verbal sleight of hand. So overall, if you can just get better at listening to people, and when you hear an argument, think, what is the purpose of this argument? Then, or like, what is the purpose of this step in terms of the argument? That's really what you want to get. Now, argument mapping obviously facilitates that. So I agree with Lawrence about that thing. But my biggest piece of advice is try and pay attention to the argument's formal features rather than its cosmetic features. Look at the way that the argument is laid out, etc. The best piece of advice to that, because that piece of advice is, well, obviously good, it's also obviously vague. What I think you should do is think about things in terms of claim, warrant, and impact. Think about how claims with different warrants and impacts connect to each other. And the important thing when you understand the function of arguments, in terms of those things that I said, like claim, warrant, impact, you are then much better able to pick out the various formal features of the argument. Because those are the different parts of the arguments. When you're listening to someone and you think, this is an impact to this, then it might be way easier for you to think, oh, well, they don't actually have a link to this impact. For example, maybe they just said that the affirmative was key to a free press, and then they said government corruption is bad. It's like they need to connect those things. So that is easiest done when you translate an argument into its kind of conditions. Okay, now, last thing before we just go into a bunch of reasoning errors. How do you present a logical fallacy in a debate round? I will. So here's a question, Lawrence. If someone in a debate just went to an argument, was like, this is the fallacy of denying the antecedent, right? And then just moved on. Is that an argument?
Well, first, I'm likely to say that they probably incorrectly identified the fallacy just based on historical experience. But let's say they did in fact identify it correctly.
I'm sorry. I'm sorry. I was maybe a little unclear. I mean that they just say the words, this argument is denying the antecedent, and then move on.
Oh yeah, I was about to get to that part, and it's just like no, not an argument. Just like mentioning that something is a fallacy means virtually nothing to me. I mean, you need to explain much more, like what part of it was in fact denying the antecedent, and because something is denying the antecedent, what does that do to the strength of their argument? Does it mean that their argument is just unsalvageable because it's just so incorrect and the reasoning is just so flawed that the conclusion just cannot possibly occur? Or what does it do, right? Just saying something is X fallacy is at best an interesting FYI to me, and that's basically all it is.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. And whenever you present a logical fallacy, basically the phrase "this is a logical fallacy because" usually is just hot air. Because whenever you say that an argument is a fallacy, you still need to explain what's wrong with it, right? And in many ways, you can entirely skip the first part if you feel that that is something that is acceptable, right?
Yeah.
You can just say, this argument is wrong because, or this argument is an error in reasoning because. Now, I will still say that you do get some mileage from calling things logical fallacy in debate for a couple of reasons. But I would basically think of this argument, and tell me if this makes sense, Lawrence, to think of calling an argument logical fallacy as kind of like a tag, right? In the sense that you're just like, it's not a warrant, right? You haven't justified it. You haven't even justified why their argument is wrong. But it is kind of a handy, easy to understand sometimes explanation that the judge can sort of file away in their mind about why it's wrong. Like they can say, this is the denying the antecedent argument.
Right. I agree. It's
Kind
more
of
or less
like
just a tagline.
right?
Like a good buzzword that like gets my attention.
Yeah. And I would think of it more like that, rather than of something else. That said, here is kind of the template that I suggest for pointing out reasoning errors. I would say it has 3 steps. First of all, I would say, this argument, be specific. Don't just say their case makes this error, unless their case really is just one giant logical reasoning error, which would be hilarious. But you would just say the argument makes this error, and I would treat that as the tag. And then the second and third parts are basically, you would say, here's the thing that their argument does. That's like, let's call it X. Their argument did X. And then after that, you say that the thing X is the error that I mentioned. So a perfect example would be, my opponent made this argument. This argument was the error of denying the antecedent, and is therefore a logical fallacy. The argument says that just because something that was enough for something to happen failed to happen, that the necessary condition couldn't occur. You don't have to understand what that means at this moment. But the point is, you basically said their argument did this, and that is an example of this error. That's what I would do. So, first part, you have to say that the argument makes the error. You don't really technically have to say it, but it helps. Then you just say something that their argument did, and then you point out the location of the error, and then you explain why that location is an error. Am I explaining this, clearly, Lawrence? Do you have a kind of easier way?
No, I mean that seems like a good way to do it for me too. As long as you're not just like flagging something as a logical fallacy and moving on, which is like I think the number one thing that happens when people first learn about what a logical fallacy is. They just like feel compelled to mention that every argument that they touch on the flow is a logical fallacy, but then all they do is mention, it's a logical fallacy, and I'm like, great. You want to tell me why that matters?
Yeah, I mean, at a certain point, an argument being a logical fallacy, for me, as a judge, would be enough to if they successfully proved it, to discount the reasoning of that specific thing. But what I think that you're kind of getting at is that, what parts of it are wrong, right? I mean, all of it, right? Like, for example, if someone just went to someone's contention and is like, this contention is a fallacy, I would be like, maybe it's true that some of the arguments in the contention are a fallacy, but it's probably not true that all of it is a fallacy. So here's the piece of advice that me and Lawrence are giving you. All right. Be clear. What part of it is an error? And if you are clear, be right about it. Because, if what you're saying is a logical fallacy, obviously is not. A lot of times judges will not give you a lot of leeway on these kinds of things.
Yeah.
And this, by the way, and let me know if you think that this is true, Lawrence, but because I just had this idea off the top of my head, but it is probably, if you had, especially dangerous with traditional kinds of judges, to call something that's a logical fallacy that isn't. Because for me, I understand those people might be a little more likely to have some of their experience kind of bleed into the decision. Am I wrong about that?
No, I think you're right. Just like the mistake of over-identifying.
But the thing is, I also think that traditional judges are also more likely than the average judge to actually know about logical fallacies, because they tend to be more learned.
Right. Yeah.
So it's like they know more stuff, and there's a slight danger of stuff creeping in. So
No, agreed.
If you have to misidentifiy a logical fallacy in front of a judge that has zero experience, then it probably isn't going to hurt you that much because they don't know the error you made, unless your opponent just makes you look like a dingus by pointing out that it's not an error. Okay. Anyway, so that was a pretty lengthy section, but we wanted to sell you all on the importance of logical fallacies, talk about how you go about getting better at spotting the fallacies, and how you kind of introduce fallacy arguments into debate. And when we come back, there'll be a very lengthy section on types of logical fallacies. What you've been waiting for, the actual logical fallacies, us going over each of them, how they work, etc. We aren't going to go over every logical fallacy because, quite frankly, that's not possible. There are too many of them, and some of them aren't even really debate applicable. So, what we're going to do, I mean, we do have, I would say, a pretty healthy number of logical fallacies, right, Lawrence?
Based on the length of this doc, then yes.
And how would you describe the health of a logical fallacy? How would you know it was healthy?
You'd have to run some scientific tests, take him to a logician physician.
What's a scientific test versus a non-scientific test?
One that actually has a control group and stuff like that.
I do like control generally.
One that is a good control group. You got a real independent variable.
Don't let any other variables tell you what to do. This is a real independent variable.
Yeah, you don't need no one else.
We're both just dancing around saying that phrase. All right. So we've kind of broken these errors up into various, kind of buckets, various types of error. So the first big type of error we have is cause and effect errors. So cause and effect errors. Basically, in debate, there's a huge percentage of arguments are related to cause and effect because a lot of it's related to, like, if you do the resolution, doing the resolution will cause this thing to happen, right? Doing the action of the resolution will either cause something good if you're app or something bad if you're neg. And given just the overwhelming percentage of cause and effect arguments in debate, you would expect there to be a lot of reasoning errors kind of related to that. In general, I would say that there are now, Lawrence, this is an obvious question, of course, but would you say that most of the reasoning errors in causality are attributed to people that could have inferred something when they didn't, or shouldn't have inferred something when they did?
Oh, I have no idea that
what I just said.
Oh no! I just
I put that in a confusing way.
Well, I get the question. It's more just like me trying to draw from any anecdotal evidence I have is like at least it's pretty limited, and I certainly don't think I have enough knowledge to make a real guess here.
Well. Let's put it this way: when people have been wrong about cause and effect, could it really have been that they didn't go far enough? Is that usually the problem? Or is the problem usually that they said something was going to happen that wasn't going to happen?
I want to say it's the latter, but I don't know. It's also possible that it's the former, and I just haven't been attuned to kids making the error when they are making it.
No, I'm pretty sure it's the latter. Like it's just like when people make arguments. I mean, like, think about, for example, let's just narrow this down to circuit LD rounds, right? When was the last time you saw like a policy style like advantage scenario, and you were like, "Wow, I think that it would be totally reasonable for this person to continue their impact change several more times"?
Never.
Never, right? I mean, there's always been that they've inferred that a bunch of things that weren't going to happen were going to happen, right? Now, I understand the kind of frustration, which is to say, how do you know for sure when they could have gone farther? But, like, think of just the amount of rounds and just think, like, could this person have reasonably extended this argument and had it still make sense? Obviously not, in the vast majority of cases. And did they say that something would happen that obviously was not able to be inferred from the presence of the above stuff? I would say most of the time. Okay, yeah. So we have kind of three ways of inferring causality. in the wrong way. So basically, all of these errors are like someone takes these factors and then says that that means that something causes something else. So, for example, the first reasoning error we have, and this is one that you all should know from science class actually, is that correlation does not mean causation. Now, Lawrence, what is a correlation?
A correlation is some weak connection between
Well, it
A
doesn't
and
have to be weak.
okay, sure. Some connection between A and B. Some relationship of some sort. It doesn't have to be causal, although I guess it could
They vary together, right? So
be. Yeah.
like it could be that when A goes up, so that A goes up, B goes up. And it could also be that when A goes up, B goes down. And those things kind of tend to happen at the same time.
Right.
Now, in order so let's say that, for example, Lawrence, that you are a an environmental scientist.
Right.
Yeah, of course. That's a very 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 plausible situation, right? You're Lawrence Zhao, the ecologist, and you are in an environment, and you notice that whenever the swan population in this island goes up, the amount of lily pads in the island also goes up. And vice versa. You notice that when the swan population decreases, that the lily pads that the lily pads decrease as well. So my question is, before you sort of jump to conclusions, perhaps, is that enough to say that one of these things caused the other?
Certainly not, because there are, and in this instance, almost definitely alternative causes, or third, fourth, fifth, sixth, seventh different alternate causes for why these two things are simultaneously occurring.
Yeah, I mean, that's what it is. Now, I just want you to think long and hard back to the time when you were in a science class, Lawrence. I
That was
actually
a
don't
long
know
time
when it
ago.
was. But the thing was, in a science class, so you mentioned earlier about having control groups.
Right.
Okay. So what is the point of a control group in science?
It's to ensure that the variable that you are testing is the only variable that is being manipulated, and so that there aren't additional factors or variables that will
So
affect the outcome.
if you wanted to put that in terms that you already use,
Uh,
it's so that you can rule out what?
rule out what alt causes, I guess.
Yes, rule out alternative causes. That's exactly what it is. So, for example, when you're doing an experiment, let's say you're trying to figure out the effect of drinking coffee on your health. Okay. Now, if you now one of the reasons that you have a group that didn't drink coffee at all is so you would then have a group that drank coffee and a group that didn't. And if you didn't have that group that didn't drink coffee, you couldn't say that it wasn't any number of other factors. Similarly, there's all sorts of ways that samples can be biased. You can have, for example, maybe you only look at 18 to 20-year-olds and determine that coffee has no negative effects.
Right.
Right.
Yeah. And
And then
that's
it's
actually
like,
really
and then
interesting
that's the
stuff.
cause, right?
Yeah. There's like tons of criticisms of a lot of the studies in social sciences because they're almost all conducted on willing
Psychology
respondents
students. Yeah.
in a college setting, right? Well, it doesn't even have to be psychology students. Just like the test subjects that OU, the university that I go to, that they get, they're all just people that like were incentivized to show up for a little bit of extra money. College students, and college students are by themselves not particularly representative of the entire background population, and certainly kids that respond to incentives for studies are not representative of even the average college kid, which is not representative of the background environment. And so it's like kind of interesting to look at studies based on college students because it very rarely generalizes.
Yeah, that's true. So correlation does not prove causation. Now, here's how you would know if your opponent has made an argument. Because most scientific studies establish correlations, but very few of them establish causations. Just proving that two things happen at the same time does not show the way that they influenced each other. Does that make sense, Lawrence?
Yeah. And
It could be any number of ways, and we're about to talk about sort of two alternative explanations.
right.
Now,
I will say one of my favorite websites is like, I forget what the website is called, but it's like a website that just tracks random correlations that like look so close they must be like causal. It's just like number of Nick Cage movies released in a year related to like the health rates in like Switzerland or something like obesity rates in Switzerland or something like that. And they just like track absurd correlations with each other.
Yeah, so what this thing is trying to isolate is that even though two variables can sort of like happen, can either go up or down at the same time, does not mean that they influence each other. You know, the thing that, Lawrence mentioned is proof that it could just be, totally random, or some of these other factors might happen. So these ones are far, are a little maybe like more common in debate. So what'll happen a lot of times is people will present a correlation, even though they're not going to call it a correlation. They'll just say like, oh, when this happens, this thing also tends to be sort of happening at the same time, right? That's a correlation. And then they would say that something causes something else. Now, Lawrence, here's an example that I have to kind of demonstrate that. So, kids playing the Fortnite video game and a decline in grades. Now, I think you could make an argument one way or the other, but I think it would be. But what would you say to someone who said, if you were in a debate and this was like the topic, and then someone said, well, this proves that once people's grades decline, then they just play Fortnite as a way of letting off steam.
Right. And the problem is that absent additional evidence to support that claim, it's just as likely to run the other direction, which is that playing more Fortnite decreases one's academic performance.
Yeah, I think that's far more plausible.
It seems much more plausible to me on face, although I don't want to rule out the original explanation.
Yeah, of course you wouldn't. but but yeah, so the idea is, but here's the thing. Both of these causal directions are sort of plausible, at least, right?
Right.
But the thing is, your opponent needs to rule out that alternative cause. They can't just immediately conclude that the cause goes one way. It's equally likely to go the other way. And in debate, it can be really persuasive to argue that, in fact, the cause should go in the opposite direction of your opponent. To say, my opponent has illicitly inferred that the cause goes this way. In fact, it's even more likely that it goes this way. So, for example, you might say that for some things, right, the cause effect relationship is really hard to determine, such that it really could legitimately go both ways. For example, the relationship between economic growth and war, right? You could very easily say that a decrease in war leads to economic growth. Because, and you can kind of make up any number of explanations, but one easy one is just that, like, when your wars are expensive. So if you're not in wars, you eventually just make a lot of money. But also, you could say the opposite thing is true. You could say the more economic growth people have, the less incentive they have to get into wars. And the point is, in international relations, even, that cause and effect relationship is very difficult to figure out who's right about that. So when you are in a debate, don't let your opponent just assert that it's one way. It could easily go the other way. And the best way to do that is to point out that it could be the other way. Now, Lawrence, are you familiar with the like ice cream example for the next thing we're about to talk about? It's a really famous study.
Yes, I am vaguely familiar with it.
Yeah. So this is one of the most famous, I think, examples in the social sciences of a kind of funny cause effect sort of relationship. So for those of you that don't know, the sales of ice cream, and I forget whether it was specifically strawberry ice cream, but it might be, but it's at least ice cream. The sales of ice cream are strongly correlated with the murder rate. Which is obviously an insane thought, right? It's like, wait, so yeah, as the ice cream sales go up, so does the murder rate. Now, it is obvious that ice cream sales, I mean, you can make up all sorts of explanations. You can be like, oh, murderers kill people. And then they're like, wow, that was really exhausting. I really could use some ice cream, right? Or people just eat ice cream, they get like a sugar craze, lose their common sense, and then just go on killing sprees. But now, Lawrence, but the problem here, right, is not the fact that the cause goes the other way, right? The
Right.
problem is that these two things aren't related to something else. But then why is their correlation so good? What's the reason?
Um, well, apparently
It
there's not a definitive answer, right? I think
so
a lot
it's
of
not
people
that
think
they
it's
have a relationship with each other. It's that they both have a relationship with what?
well, some third, some third factor. I think
Yeah.
usually chalked up to an increase in temperature. Um,
That's
but
that's it. It's the summer.
right,
So so now again, like I don't know if this is still true, but back when the study was conducted, the idea was like, yeah, in the summer you're more likely to eat ice cream, but also in some like urban areas, it was the murder rate increases in the summer because people don't want to stay in their house because it's too hot. They're just more likely to go out and commit crimes and stuff.
right. Um,
So the idea there is that it's not that the fact that ice cream caused murder or murder caused ice cream. It's that there's a third cause that causes both of them.
right.
Now this is probably, in my opinion, this is the most common kind of cause effect error that people make. So here's kind of an easy sort of explanation. People think of there being biased in, so some people think that surveys are biased. And I think a lot of surveys can be argued to be biased. Here's I think the way that people say, right? So Lawrence, I conduct a survey, right? And of the people that respond, 80% of people say that daytime TV is really good. And by daytime TV, I mean like TV that happens at like noon PM on a weekday. I said noon PM. That's the thing I've said now. At noon on a weekday. So now what would your response be to that? If I said that means that people in the United States really like daytime TV.
I mean, there'd probably likely be a response bias in terms of who is responding to this survey.
That's exactly right. So, in many ways, the other person establishes what's kind of a correlation, which is that people who answer this survey are highly correlated, with sort of indicating that they like daytime TV. What's the cause of both of those things?
They're bored and have nothing better to do than watch daytime TV and fill out surveys.
It's that the third cause is that the fact that these people are maybe like middle-aged stay-at-home moms, right? Like that explains both of these things. That is the people that are disproportionately likely to respond to the survey, and they're also disproportionately likely to say they like daytime TV. Does that make sense, Lawrence? How kind of representative bias is a kind of third cause bias.
Right, yeah.
It's that the kind of unrepresentative thing that you are also explains why you chose that thing. So representativeness bias in terms of a sample, those things are kind of third cause biases. But in general, third cause things are way easier to think up in the context of debate, because what will usually happen is someone will assert a cause effect relationship, and then you'll get the chance to say, actually, there's this third cause that explains both of them. So you'll be able to say, actually, it's the fact that these people, are good or whatever. Something like that. I think we've kind of talked about cause effect arguments enough. What I would stress is that when you're making cause effect reasoning fallacy arguments, it is very important that you identify what the alternative cause is instead of just saying that they failed to prove cause. Because here's the thing, Lawrence. If I said, I want you to give me the best probability of producing a cause, right? Something that doesn't have a correlation and something that does. Which one is more likely to produce a cause? If there is a correlation or there isn't one?
The one with a correlation.
Yeah, obviously, right? I mean, like, so the correlation is not by itself usually good enough to present a cause, like logically. That's a reasoning error. However, it's better than nothing. So if you don't have an alternative explanation for your opponent's argument, you don't have, for example, that the cause goes the other way. You don't have a third cause. You don't have any other alternative cause for the variable. Then you still haven't really done very much to your opponent's argument. And this kind of goes back to what Lawrence was talking about, how it's important not just to point out that your opponent has an error, but to very much say, here's what you should do with that error. And the best way to do that for a cause-effect argument is to give your own cause. It would be even better if you could solve that cause, but that's kind of another podcast. Okay, so that's cause and effect. To repeat, correlation, so we have 3 cause-effect errors. One of them is correlation doesn't mean causation. The other one is that the cause that they've cited is reversed. And the other one is that the third one is that there is a third cause that causes both of those things to happen at the same time. Okay. Let's talk about the next group of fallacies. Well, we've called these fallacies, and there are 5 ones in here. This is external factor fallacies. And I've kind of grouped them together. But basically, external factor fallacies are fallacies that appeal to things beyond the actual argument as a way of trying to support the argument. Of course, if you want to construct a logically valid argument, all of the things that you do to advance it must be in support of that, right? You can't use things to skip steps, and you can't use things that don't actually make arguments in place of arguments. So, here's one opinion that I have about this, which is that some of you might be thinking, why am I talking about this? A lot of these things are obvious errors. Well, some of them are more obvious than others, actually. And there are some that people don't even realize are errors. They don't even think that these are appeals to external factors. But also, if everyone knows that these things are obviously wrong, then why do you all keep reading these in front of me in debates? You know? And why do people don't recognize that they are errors? This makes me mad. I assume it makes Lawrence mad too. If only he were with us and could tell us whether or not they felt.
If only I felt emotions like anger.
I guess so. So we have 5 ways, of course, of appealing to external factors. Number 1 is an ad hominem attack. What's that, Lawrence?
Ad hominem. I thought we were avoiding using the Latin phrases here, but it's an attack on the character or disposition of a person rather than the argument itself.
Yeah, I believe it means to the man, right?
Yeah.
So basically, this is when this one is the most obviously wrong of all of these appeals to external factors, is to insult the person making the argument.
Right.
This is obviously a logical fallacy. Just to say that someone's argument, that someone is a bad person, does not mean that their argument is bad. But I really want us to be exactly clear on why this is a fallacy. Lawrence, is an ad hominem attack a fallacy because it leads to an uncivil debate?
No. In fact, that itself is probably a logical fallacy. It is a fallacy because it is totally unrelated to the validity or soundness, look at those vocab terms being used there, of the argument that is being presented. And whether or not the person is what you might deem a good or bad person has virtually nothing to do with the quality of an argument.
Yeah, actually nothing. That's why. It's that it's not affected their argument at all. However, there is one kind of thing that looks like an ad hominem attack that is kind of a good thing that you should be doing sometimes in your rounds, which is to say that sometimes people have arguments that are partially contingent on the credibility of a source. So, for example, maybe the evidence is contingent on the credibility of a certain scientist who makes a claim being a kind of credible account of what is going on. Now, here's the thing. You are totally allowed to say that this person's credibility should be lower than they're maybe presenting it as, and that therefore kind of decreases the overall credit that you give to the argument. But this isn't really trying to undermine their argument per se, right? Well, you aren't saying your argument is wrong because you don't have credibility. You're just saying that maybe some of the facts that you're citing, some of which are dependent on credibility, some of these premises maybe aren't as sound as people think they are. Sure, that's okay, right? But the important thing is not to be so just because someone isn't always qualified to talk about a thing doesn't mean their argument is wrong. We're not saying that. But it does, but like if someone's credentials just don't match the content of what they're saying, you can feel free to point that out. But it doesn't disprove their argument, right? It just kind of weakens it a little bit.
Yeah, just gives some skepticism to the argument.
Yes. All right. The next way that you can have a fallacy that appeals to an external factor is what's called a genetic fallacy. Lawrence, could you explain what a genetic fallacy is?
Yeah, so it's where you make a claim about the quality of an argument based on its origins, and when you attempt to determine the worth of an argument based on its origins. I think one example that I've used in the past is saying something along the lines of the Volkswagen is a sort of evil car because it has its roots in the designs of Nazi Germany, which is, I think, true actually, because Volkswagen is a German company and the Beetle is an offshoot of a German company that existed during Nazi Germany. But I don't really think that has any implication on whether or not that is a, quote, good or bad car.
Yeah, I mean the Volkswagen example is perfect. Now let's think about that in the context of an argument. Now the fact that an argument was made by someone who is a bad person or something, now that doesn't dispute the fact that the argument can be good. Right. In many ways, this is kind of similar in the way that it plays out to an ad hominem if it's about a person, right? But the idea is, let's imagine that it's not about a specific person that you're kind of like indicting. Let's say there was an argument and it was made by so there's a philosopher named Carl Schmitt. He was a ranking member of the Nazi military, I believe, right?
Yes, I believe so.
He also made some like pretty good compelling arguments about why liberalism is bad. Now the point is, it might be easy to kind of dismiss his points on the grounds that the sort of school of thought that is influencing it is tainted by Nazism. I think tainted is a weak word for what Nazism does to his argument. Almost fully determines it, right?
Yeah.
But the point is, it will be a fallacy to then conclude that his argument was wrong just on that basis, even if it came from an evil source. And this is a thing that a lot of people don't really, aren't as good at coming to terms with. But here's another thing. Here's maybe a slightly less charged example. You could say, for example, that that the golden rule, let's say, treat others as you would have them treat you. How you would want to be treated, etc. That comes from Christianity. And let's say you had some bad thoughts about Christianity. You really did not like Catholicism or whatever. And someone brought up that as an example to you. They were just saying, like, the origin of this thought is sort of a history of Catholicism. Or, not even necessarily Catholicism. I really don't know anything about Christianity. I don't know what I'm talking about. But it's like, it comes from Christianity. Therefore, the argument is in some sense wrong. But here's another way. So, like, a genetic fallacy kind of goes a little bit further than that. Because, so a genetic it would obviously be a genetic fallacy to say that something is wrong because it's affiliated with Christianity. But correct me if I'm wrong, Lawrence, wouldn't it also be a genetic fallacy to say that the argument was sort of therefore essentially Christian?
Sure, yeah. I think so.
The idea is an argument is not at all influenced by who made it or its source, even if that source was a 2,000-year-old tradition. You can't say that the argument is essentially an argument of a certain kind just for that reason. Right. Genetic fallacies don't really come up that often.
I feel I feel like they're relatively prominent in debate where people will discredit an argument merely based on its origin. So it's just like, this argument was from the Enlightenment, which also, didn't take a particularly strong stance in condemning slavery. We should, reject it. And you're like, nah, really? I mean, like, evaluate the claim based on its merits. That an idea, the Enlightenment idea that, like, we shouldn't torture babies is part of the Enlightenment. This should not be on its face a reason to discredit the statement of, hey, we don't like torturing babies.
You are right. I guess I was thinking about a different class of debate when I was thinking about there not really being that many genetic fallacies.
Fair
but
enough.
yeah, certainly of the exact kind of debates that you're judged is part of the problem that I have with those debates. Okay. So here's number 3 for the kind of an appeal to external factors. I had this as the red herring fallacy. For some reason, people just keep saying that this is a logical fallacy, and I really don't think it is. But it is certainly a fallacy of some kind. But it's not a fallacy really of logic. So, okay, a red herring is just a phrase that means something that's not important but designed to distract you. I don't know exactly what the fish origin of that story is, of that phrase. Do you know, Lawrence? I'm just curious.
I actually have no idea. I mean,
Okay.
I'm pretty sure.
I feel no desire to learn, but I was just wondering because it is a kind of a
I
weird
think it's
specific fish.
So they used the fish, which is really smelly, I think, and they used it in hunting, to distract whatever they were hunting with the
Oh, I see.
smell.
Perhaps. But anyway, so red herring is just when you present something that is irrelevant to the features of the argument as a way of distracting them, as a way of distracting you. That's what it is. So a red herring isn't really an argument. So, for example, appeals oftentimes to emotion are characterized as red herrings, which is not to say that they aren't effective, because they might be effective in persuasion. But the point is that basically, if your opponent is using persuasive tactics to hide the fact that they don't have an argument, which will happen a fair amount, then that is a quote-unquote red herring argument. I won't say that it's a fallacy, because it's not like when someone makes a red herring, it's not really that they've attempted to, be fallacious about anything in particular, right? They basically just were trying to distract you from stuff. But it wasn't that they made a reasoning error, usually. It's just that they are trying to get one over you. So, as far as a red herring fallacy, you don't really even. I actually don't think it's ever advantageous to point out whether something is a red herring fallacy. But I would definitely just pay attention yourself to think, okay, is that actually contributing to their argument, or is it not? And if it's not, treat it as such. All right, Lawrence, what is an appeal to authority? This is number 4.
Yeah, so an appeal to an authority is an attempt to claim that your argument has, is sound or is valid merely because the person espousing it occupies some position of authority, be it they an expert on the subject area, someone older than you, et cetera, et cetera.
Yeah, so that was exactly right. And I also think that people can easily get confused. So, Lawrence, I'm going to give you an argument, and I want you to tell me whether it is an appeal to authority. So, the economy is increasing now. The economy is improving. The economy is improving because unemployment figures are consistently declining. I have evidence from Professor Joe Roebuck in 2017, who cites a lot of different panel data to account for this. So is that an appeal to authority?
No, it doesn't appear on face to be, because appeal to authority is not a reason to dismiss the claims of experts or scientific consensus or people that have actually studied the issue that gives them unique insight to lend credibility or support for especially the empirical points that are being contested here. It is really only a fallacy when the only supporting factor you have going for you is the fact that they are an authority. If, for example, all you said was the Earth is 6,000 years old, you should trust, or the Earth is flat and you should trust B.O.B. because he's a really good rapper. That would not be a particularly good argument and would in fact be an appeal to authority. And in this instance, an egregious one, because it's an appeal to an irrelevant authority.
Yeah. Well, he is certainly an irrelevant authority. I think everyone can agree on that.
Well, at least when it comes to, whether or not the Earth is flat or not.
That's true. Now, but again, Lawrence really has hit on the important part here. Saying that someone who is an authority supports your argument, or using authorities to support your argument, is totally fine, right? The problem is saying that your argument is just good because somebody else said it or believes it. Arguments aren't good just because someone believes them. Arguments are good if they are valid, right? So an example of the sort of previous thing I was saying about an appeal to authority is to say that the economy is doing well, and that's because Joe Roebuck thinks the economy is doing well, and Joe Roebuck is a qualified economist. So that is an appeal to authority. It says, even though Joe Roebuck is qualified, he could be as qualified as we want, but that does not prove an argument by itself. Just saying that because someone believes it, it must be true, is obviously false. Now, here's the thing. I think maybe when you all are listening to this, you might think that this doesn't happen very often. But in fact, it happens in every local debate that I judge. So the place this happens actually most often is philosophy. When people are presenting value criterion arguments, Lawrence, how many times have you listened to someone read a criterion of like Locke's social contract and then they don't attempt to say why it's good? They just say that Locke said it and then move on.
Yeah, so probably it doesn't take that form that often, but it's more or less what they're saying.
They usually just describe Locke's social contract and move on, right?
Right. That's the form it most often takes, which is like my value is morality, my criterion is Locke's social contract, and then they read a piece of evidence from two treatises of government and describe, what the social contract is, like how it arose from the state of nature, blah blah blah. And if you're interested in learning about that, I think we have an episode on the social contract somewhere back.
And I don't have to think; I know.
Yeah. And then that is like their reason for why their criterion has both like a syllogism to support it and additional reasons to prefer it. And that is just not how we actually think about philosophy, or at least it should not be.
Yeah. So you're right. Usually people don't say Locke is a philosopher and therefore you should believe him because of his philosopher. In many ways, even that bad argument that I presented is charitable, right? But that is really what they mean, right? I mean, like, that is so, like, sometimes I think when people make the point, they do not think that they have to justify Locke's social contract. But other times, I think that they just think that it is justificational. The fact that they've said that Locke said it. Do you agree with me?
Yeah, no, that is like, especially in a lot of local debates, I just see debaters that will basically just present dueling value criterions with zero reason to think one is more, truthful or like valid or sound or anything like that. They just assert, like morality must care about human dignity. They're Kant, and morality must care about consequences, John Stuart Mill. And basically, they're just relying on the fact that Kant and Mill are prominent philosophers to back up their assertions without any warranting or reasoning behind it at all.
So when you are debating someone and you just hear them describe a philosophy without justifying it, especially if they say Aristotle is a person who thought all, because most of the time it's right. It's like Aristotle thinks all these things. Contention 1. And I usually interpret that as I'm supposed to think that them saying that Aristotle thinks that somehow is supposed to be its justification. And in many ways, that's a slightly better than not trying to justify it at all. But it's very close to that level. Right. So anyway, don't let people appeal to authority for you, especially in philosophical debates. Okay, and then the last one is appeals to popular opinion. This is number 5 in sort of external factor argument fallacies. So an appeal to popular opinion is just like, people think this, therefore it's true. I think this argument pops up a decent amount in, again, low-level philosophy debates. People will say something like, everyone knows that, or like lots of people recognize that people have sort of inherent right to a free press. It's like, now, they might be right about the conclusion of that, but that is not at all good reasoning, right? People think a lot of things that are wrong, right? And, a long time ago, people thought the earth was flat. They were wrong. But they weren't wrong because they were dumb. The arguments just were not there to support the fact that the earth was flat. And eventually people figured out that it was wrong. So just because a lot of people think that a certain philosophy or certain argument is accurate, or that there's a certain relationship that exists, knowledge and belief are different. If a lot of people believe something, that does not make it true. This is obvious. Now, Lawrence, but I have written down something else here, which is related to common knowledge. Are you allowed to invoke common knowledge in debates?
I don't see any problem with it. It seems to be like a good heuristic or like shortcut to determining if an argument is like epistemically sound. An argument that has reached like, pretty near universal consensus amongst people had to have, some or likely had some reason for everyone to adopt such a belief. And so that's probably a decent proxy to determining whether or not simple claims are true. Like everyone knows that 2 + 2 = 4. That seems like a relatively okay reason to adopt or to believe that 2 + 2 does in fact equals 4.
Well, let's I kind of want to disagree with you in one area and agree with you in another, right? So I'll agree with you that common knowledge is good in debates. For example, if someone reads a piece of evidence that says that a reporter's shield law benefits 50 people, and then says this will because there are only 50 people in the United States, then that means that the resolution is good for everyone in the United States. So obviously, in that case, you should be able to say there are more than 50 people in the United States.
Sure,
right? That is a common sense assumption. You are allowed to appeal to that in rounds, obviously. So what I don't want you all to do is I don't want you to think, oh, appeals to popular opinion are bad. I can't just say that something is true, because an appeal to common knowledge ends up looking like an appeal to popular opinion. It's like, look, everyone knows there are more than 50 people in the United States, right?
Sure, yeah.
I do want to slightly disagree with you. The fact that 2 + 2 equals the fact that everyone agrees that 2 + 2 = 4 doesn't obviously that doesn't make it any more. I mean, I guess that does make it slightly more likely that it's true, but it's not true because of that.
Sure, I'm not, and in fact, I'm not even saying that this has any connection to.
But I think that your example is actually really good though, because basically the bar for common sense assumptions, right, is really high, right? It has to be like 2 + 2 levels of obvious, right?
Right.
It's like it's got to be extremely obvious in order to think that something is truly common knowledge. Okay, so we have those ways that an argument can appeal to external factors and therefore be a component of a reasoning error. So now we're getting into some of the real nitty gritty, kind of a little slightly more complicated logical fallacy arguments. And so let's just get into it. So our next set of fallacies is what I've called over-inferring fallacies. Now, if you infer something, right, you draw a conclusion from it, you make an inference, you say that it means something else. So if you over-infer, that means that you take a sort of insufficient, amount of information or arguments, and you use it to conclude something that you shouldn't be able to do. This is a classic reasoning error, right? To take incomplete information, to say A leads to B, B leads to C, therefore A leads to D. It's like, wait, what about D? Right? You didn't mention that at all, right? So that's what these kind of fallacies are. Cause and effect fallacies are really this kind, but I thought it would be good to separate them because cause and effect fallacies are really common versions of this. So we have 3 kinds of over-inferring fallacies. The first one is what's called a slippery slope fallacy. So my understanding of a slippery slope fallacy is this, is that if someone says that something can justify something else, or is the same logic as something else, that kind of concludes that it could happen. Or another way to put it is to say, if something could happen, then a way that this fallacy would occur is to say, therefore, it will always happen. So, Lawrence, can you give me an example of a slippery slope fallacy? Or like an argument that maybe exhibits the slippery slope fallacy?
So there used to be like a television commercial back in the day where it was like, if you don't get, I think it was Dish TV, like you'll end up in the ditch on the side of the road. It was basically something along the lines of like, if you don't have cable, if you don't have satellite, when the cable goes out, you'll get sad. When you get sad, you go for long walks at night. And when you go for long walks at night, you'll get hit by a car. And when you get hit by a car, you'll end up in the side of the ditch on the side of the road. Don't end up in this ditch on the side of the road and like get satellite TV or something like that. I'm missing like actually like 10 steps in that example. But that is...
You're probably not missing that many steps relative to the logic of the original argument.
Sure, but like the commercial was like 15 steps. It was ridiculous. And there's several versions of this too. But it would basically say, if you do not want to end up in a ditch in the side of the road after being hit by a car, buy satellite TV. And it's basically a slippery slope because it's saying that if A happens, then necessarily B, C, D, E, F, G, and then all the way down to Z will happen. And because you do not want Z to happen, you should, do A. And the reason that is obviously fallacious is because like it is not even close to guaranteed, not even like remotely close to assured that not buying a satellite will in fact get you in a ditch on the side of the road. Obviously, I hope.
So I think that is a good example of a fallacy, but I kind of want to clarify some stuff about why it's that fallacy. So an argument isn't a fallacy just because it has lots of steps, right? Because
Right.
what it kind of sounded like to the untrained ear, like what you were describing, is like just the fact that an argument, you know, would, that something with X would lead to Y, that Y would lead to Z, that Z would lead to A, and then therefore, like, X leads to A. It's like the fact that there are all those middle things doesn't mean it's a fallacy, right? You can have plenty of valid logical arguments with lots of steps.
Sure.
But the thing is, if you say, like, but in fact, the real problem is every single step that argument takes, right? So, for example, if you don't have satellite TV, then you will go outside. The error is the will part of that, right? The
Sure.
correct part would be you could go outside. And then you could do this, and then you could do that, and then you could do that. So the error is inferring a will from a could. The way that I've seen the slippery slope fallacy kind of like play out is when people say, well, if the government can take, we shouldn't let the government take any of our freedoms. Because if the government can take a freedom, then that means they could take lots of freedoms. And if that means they could take every freedom, and we shouldn't let them take every freedom. Therefore, we shouldn't let them take one freedom.
Yeah.
And that's a fallacy because even though it's possible for the government to then take additional freedoms, it is by no means likely or guaranteed. And you have not proven that, which means the argument is wrong. Am I sort of accurately describing the point as you understand it, Lawrence?
Yeah, although I mean that seems to make a lot of sense to me. Although generally I tend to think of the slippery slope as most advantages and disadvantages in in LD debate. But yeah, the sort of like this justifies, insert absurd hypothetical here. Therefore, don't do A is in the context of
but in many
philosophy, it
ways,
makes a
the
lot of sense to me.
absurdness of the hypothetical does indicate that it's a slippery slope, but that's more of the symptom than the cause.
Sure,
it's more like the reason that the hypothetical is absurd is that they've turned a could statement into a would statement.
right.
Right.
Yeah.
It's that they've said, if North Korea, gives, if we don't enter into a deal with North Korea, that justifies us theoretically canceling deals with everybody. And it would be really bad if we cancel deals with everybody. Therefore, we shouldn't do the first thing. The point is, yes, it could happen, but it probably won't, and you haven't proved that it will. So the reason that a lot of these disadvantages are bad is that, for example, I just was looking at a disadvantage last night. Let me know if you saw this one, Lawrence. There was a disadvantage that I saw that someone had read that said something to the effect of, I mean, it was just riddled with logical reasoning errors. Well, like, one of them was like, we can use the consumption of cannabis can solve some diseases.
Right. Okay.
And then they had a piece of evidence that's like, some diseases will kill us all. And like that was those were the last two cards in the disadvantage. And it's like, just because we could use cannabis to cure all these diseases doesn't mean we will. So that argument is a slippery slope. It's a logical reasoning error. It has taken something and inferred too much from it. So when you all are paying attention to arguments in debate, as Lawrence said, if an argument has too many steps, it probably has a slippery slope argument somewhere. But what you should think of is, has your opponent really proved that these bad things would happen, or just that they could happen, and then sort of illicitly inferred that they therefore would happen? This happens most often in the context of legal debates. People will say, like, oh, if the government that has this legal ability, then it'll do all this other stuff. It's like, well, no. You still have to obviously prove that it would. And if you don't, then you kind of fail to make an argument. Are we of the same mind about the argument, Lawrence?
Oh,
You
of
think?
course we are.
Of course we are. I think we hashed it out a little bit there. Now, this next over-inferring fallacy is one that you're really excited about, Lawrence. Tell us about the fallacy.
Yeah, so the fallacy is currently my favorite fallacy. I,
We are the kind of people that have favorite fallacies up here. Hashtag debate coach.
yeah, I'm not even sure where I heard about this, but I stumbled across it and it instantly became my favorite. So the fallacy is also known as like the argument from fallacy, and it's the fallacy that occurs when it's claimed that if an argument contains a logical fallacy, then the proposition used to support it is incorrect, or that the conclusion is false. Um, and sometimes, uh, you could rephrase it as like, don't shoot the message. So just because the messenger is in fact stupid does not mean that the message itself is. And so, like, an example uh, of how this argument is usually phrased is something like, if argument A, then conclusion B. A is a fallacious argument, therefore conclusion B is false. And that is just not necessarily the case. So an example might be like, all cats are animals. Ginger is an animal, therefore Ginger is a cat. And you might point out something like, you have made a fallacy by assuming that, by proving that Ginger is an animal, does not necessarily mean that Ginger is a cat, since not all animals are cats. There's a logical fallacy there. And that must mean, therefore, that Ginger is not a cat. And then the correct response to that would be, no. That just means that my argument was invalid. I made a very simple and obvious logical reasoning error, but that does not mean that Ginger is not a cat. It just means that Ginger is a cat, but for reasons that are not demonstrated in the poorly phrased and formed argument.
Yeah. So, exactly. In many ways, I think this is one of the most common debate fallacies, which is to say, when someone is debating you and they prove that your argument is bad, or like the argument that you've presented in favor of something is bad, that does not mean that they have won, that the opposite is the case. It just means that they've disproven one of your potential reasons. So, which is why, for example, if I have 3 reasons that the economy is doing well, and they show that there are reasoning errors in 2 of them, that has no bearing on the third at all, unless they are the same argument in disguise. But if they are truly different arguments, it shouldn't affect the reasoning at all. And basically, what it is if someone makes a reasoning error at a crucial point in their reasoning, the argument everything that's connected to that argument, in any sort of important way, doesn't really matter anymore. It's not sufficient to prove the thing. But so often in debate, you hear people just assert the opposite of someone's conclusion after they've proven their argument wrong. And so, I kind of want to demonstrate the fallacy to make sure that like everyone gets it. So, Lawrence, if I were to say, the sky is blue because I wear sunglasses. So that argument obviously like lacks many essential features and is invalid. The sky is blue because I have sunglasses. Can you conclude that because my argument is an error that the sky is not blue?
Yeah, no, I really cannot. I could not, without any good reason, say that the sky was not blue.
Well, at least not from what I said,
Right.
right? So like how about this? What if I said the sky is not blue because I have sunglasses?
Right. So that would be a conclusion that's is false, and reasoning that is poor. So invalid, unsound.
Well, yeah. Well, it's at least invalid. Um, but so the point is, right, that even though you might be tempted to say, that this argument is a reasoning error, therefore the sky has to be blue because this argument's so stupid, right? But the idea is that even if an argument is stupid, and even if the opposite conclusion looks plausible, you can't just immediately infer the opposite conclusion.
Right.
Here's the main takeaway that I would have from the fallacy, you people who are listening. When you are debating someone and your opponent makes an argument that is kind of important, don't just content yourself with destroying their argument. also assert the opposite of what they are saying. For example, if they make a bad argument why by instituting a reporter's shield law would encourage press freedom. Let's say that they made a bad argument in favor of that. Don't just say that their argument is bad. Also make the opposite point. Also say, in addition to their argument for why shield laws increasing press freedom being bad, press laws also do not increase press freedom, or they decrease it. The point is, always follow up your reasoning errors, if possible, with a denial of their conclusion, because you haven't actually done that. Just showing that someone hasn't proven their conclusion doesn't deny it. In debate sense, it means that they haven't really justified it. However, it could still be true the opposite way. It's always better for you to also reverse their conclusion in addition to just disproving their logic for it. That also is important for generating things like turns, which are all sorts of important things. I really like the fallacy too. Okay, so the next over-inferring fallacy is the third one, is overgeneralizing. So what does it mean to overgeneralize, Lawrence? You had this written down earlier as hasty generalization, and I changed it to just straight up overgeneralizing because obviously the speed at which you overgeneralize is not really important to whether or not you've made an error.
Yeah.
But so what is an overgeneralization?
In general, it is when you attempt to draw a conclusion or make a statement about something that is more general than the available evidence that you have access to would justify.
Mm-hmm. So if I said, for example, that the taxes are low in the United States because of my three friends, we all have low taxes.
Right.
That would be an overgeneralization.
That would certainly be a problem.
And why is that an overgeneralization?
Well, you were drawing on three individuals in a nation of 320 million. You were probably not representative. And so to draw a conclusion about low tax rates across the entire country based on the available evidence would be to say too much given the limited evidence you have available.
Yeah, that's right. And I think that overgeneralizing happens most often in kind of like statistics debates. Would you agree, Lawrence?
Yeah, and like some debaters will be like, this one small study in like one city proves it, therefore, the entire country should. And you're like, yeah, I mean, maybe, but probably not.
Yeah, so in general, right, I would treat this as kind of the biggest sort of, net as far as over-inferring is concerned. There are a lot of things that are overgeneralizations. And overgeneralizations happen in almost every round, right? Someone will say that because something solved something in one situation, here's how I would treat overgeneralizations. If some people oftentimes in many debates, right, that you judge, Lawrence, people just present examples. They'll say, here's an example of a time where the affirmative solved something. That is not enough to conclude that the affirmative will always solve, or even that the affirmative solves most of the time, which you would think is kind of the lowest bar, right? Is that it's slightly better than not doing it, right? But
right, yeah.
just one or even two examples oftentimes aren't enough to prove that. That is an overgeneralization. They've proved that because the affirmative worked one time, it will always work. Now, here's the thing about overgeneralizations. Lawrence, if I had an example of a time where a reporter's shield law works, is that better than not having an example?
Oh, of course.
All things being equal, it is, right? So the point is that just like that thing that we were talking about earlier, just like with the correlation, right? Having singular instances is better than nothing. So just pointing out that someone has made an overgeneralization doesn't immediately destroy their argument, but it does weaken it substantially. Now, what you have to do if someone makes an overgeneralization is provide your own examples or provide counterexamples that are more sort of sufficient. So let's say someone says, here's my one study that says that reporters' shield laws worked one time. A way to respond to that might be to say, this is an overgeneralization. Just because it worked in one county in Nevada doesn't mean that a reporter's shield law would work nationally. Here is some evidence that a reporter's shield law generally nationwide will not work. So you kind of pointed out why their argument doesn't prove what they want it to prove, and then you provide the kind of counter conclusion as well. Lawrence, do you have anything else to say about overgeneralizations?
Don't do it.
I mean, try not to, at least. If you have ever made an overgeneralization, please email the argument clinic podcast at gmail.com with your tales of woe, so that Lawrence can empathize and send you emojis as a response. Lawrence, what's your stance on emojis?
They exist.
It's hardly a stance.
More than one might reasonably expect out of me if you have ever met me. So
just like yeah, that's what I want from Lawrence. I can really trust him for just like a basic description of circumstances.
Yeah, that is my stance towards it, is that they exist, and I don't necessarily hate their existence.
All right, that's great. Okay, so now this last reasoning error kind of has its own category. This is a kind of a circular reasoning, is what it's called. Now, an argument is circular if it appeals to itself as a way of justifying itself, which is kind of a weird phrase to say. Think about it as a circle. If you were to say that something is true, so I think the most common example of this that I see is every novice framework argument. Right, Lawrence?
Probably.
Especially the ones for util, right?
Yeah, a lot of those ones.
A lot of them say things like, we should use utilitarianism because a failure to use utilitarianism results in a decline in our welfare. Now, the problem with that is that if you translated the phrase a decline in our welfare, you would get a decrease in happiness. Which was therefore all you'd be saying in that argument is that a decrease in happiness leads to a decrease in happiness, which we already know. That's not enough to prove that a decrease in happiness is bad. This happens a lot in framework debates in particular, is where circular reasoning really comes up. If someone says that something is true, and then one of the reasons they give just already assumes that it's true, then that's why they did.
Right. So there's this movie called Idiocracy. It's like a 2006 movie where basically this guy gets, he's in the present, he gets frozen, and he wakes up in the future where everyone is just like an idiot, for lack of a better term. And it turns out he walks into this world, and it turns out they are watering their plants with Brondo, which is basically just Gatorade. And he asks them, why are you watering the plants with Brondo or Gatorade? And they respond, because it's got electrolytes. And then he asks them, what are these electrolytes? Do you even know? And then they respond, they're what they use to make Brondo. And then he asks, hey, why do you use them to make Brondo? And then they go, because they got electrolytes. And that goes on for some period of time.
Isn't there the phrase, because they're what the plants need?
It's what the plants crave, is something.
I think that's what it is. I haven't actually seen the movie all the way through, but I do remember that part.
Yeah, it's got what plants crave, I believe, is the actual line. It's an excellent movie
because they have electrolytes.
Yeah, but yeah, they were just like, why do we use this? Because it's got electrolytes, and why why do they have got electrolytes? Like, because Brondo, and you're like, oh, okay.
Yeah. So the point is, look for this especially in the context of value criterion debate. If someone is making an argument and it sounds like they're appealing to reasonable things, check that the thing that they're appealing to isn't the exact same thing that they're trying to justify. The best way to kind of make this argument is to say that an argument begs the question. An argument begs the question if it assumes something that is its conclusion, if it assumes its conclusion somewhere in it. It begs the question, because it begs the question of why happiness is good in the first place. That's the way that you would kind of deploy it. Someone would say, this argument is circular because it begs the question of why happiness is necessary for morality anyway. Or something like that. All right, so those are all the reasoning errors that we have for you today. Obviously, there are more, but we are sort of swiftly running out of time. So when we get back, we'll do our conclusion segment. We'll sort of thank our sponsors, and then we'll have the only important segment of our podcast, the mini debate. Stay with us. Thank you, everyone who's gotten all the way to the end and listened to all of this fabulous podcast. I hope you really learned a lot about the way to deploy argument fallacies in debate, and some common reasoning errors that maybe were happening all around you, but you didn't necessarily notice. Thank you to everyone. Thank you especially to our sponsor, Victory Briefs. Remember to check out this sweet card of the day thing that Lawrence was talking about. Victory Briefs is a great camp and has tons of great services that you all can appreciate. So now for the only important segment of our podcast, the mini debate. Now, I want to talk about old video games. Lawrence, have you played old video games? Just like any of them?
Some,
or
but
did you play video games as a kid?
well, I tried to play video games as a kid, but given that my parents are Asian, I was barred from playing that many.
So would you like to do? So I have two potential topics. One is just a topic that is historically, for you think, best online shooter, and for video games, and then the other one would be best kind of old video game that you used to play.
Well, how old? Because I got my favorite game from when I was a kid.
Old is a relative term.
Okay.
So just whenever, whatever old means to you.
Okay, sure. I'll do the old video
game from your childhood that you have emotional, attachment to.
Sure. Emotional, sure, whatever that means.
Yes, whatever that means, as you say. Okay, so if you already have an idea in mind, go ahead.
Okay, so back in the day, I did not own consoles. The only thing I was allowed to play was this small Game Boy Advance, and you might be wondering what the heck a Game Boy Advance is. And it's like a tiny handheld console that's what?
I was just sorry. I was just decrying our listeners for being young.
Yeah, it's old, like a small little Game Boy Advance. Was black and it was made by Nintendo. It had this flipped up with a small screen on it. Precursor to the 3DS. Or the Nintendo 3D. Wait, was there ever a non-3DS? I don't really know. That was a while back. Yes. Anyways, my favorite game to play on it was not Pokemon, actually, interestingly enough. It was Advance Wars, which is a small strategy game where you control little armies and have to fight people in a turn-based war strategy game. And I sunk an unknowable amount of hours into this because it was basically one of the only video games that I owned, and I just played a ton of Advance Wars. It was so fun. It was just like chess, but with little cartoon warriors.
Okay, so it was kind of like a real-time strategy game.
It isn't real-time. It was turn-based, so you move your troops, they move theirs.
Oh, I see. It was strategy, but also turn-based, very Civilization-y.
Yeah, except much less complex than Civ.
Yeah. So I originally had a different answer, which was I obviously sunk a ton of time into Pokemon as a kid. I mean,
yeah, no one would have ever been surprised by that answer.
Yeah. I think the most surprising thing for people is actually that I haven't played most Pokemon games that exist. People would probably assume that I would, but in fact I don't. However, one game that I did play a lot of was a game called Age of Mythology.
So I've not heard of this.
Really? It's actually great. It's actually so good. If you have the chance to play it now, it's worth it. So it is a real-time strategy game. It is not turn-based. You kind of move villagers around, construct buildings, etc. It's very Civilization-y. But I could never really get into Civilization games because they were just too real. They were just there's actual soldiers building, military barracks and whatever. Whereas Age of Mythology as a game really, really appealed to me because it was you have your Greek mythology and you can, train heroes and whatever, like Ajax and whatever. And you have temples that you pray to, and you can get certain god powers that you can use. And you can can summon kind of magical beasts as well to do that. It's also set very, very old, so it has a very kind of quaint mythological vibe. It was really fun. It was obviously highly strategic, although I can't claim that I was ever any good at it. But I had a lot of fun playing that game. Now, as of course this is a mini debate, so I do have to argue with you. I will say that mine's better because it was more complicated and therefore that you could do more things, but it was still fun.
Well, I actually have no idea if your game is more complicated than mine, since I've never played yours, and I assume you've never played mine.
I haven't played yours either.
But I'll accept that conclusion and just say, less complicated is actually pretty nice here. It means that you're really focusing in on, like the core gameplay elements. And you get to really have fun, expanding more on that, like the depth of breath,
like with checkers. Right, you can just really focus on that core mechanic.
It's not quite as simplistic as checkers, because you can develop, because each character has their own strengths and weaknesses. Each unit type has their own strengths and weaknesses. You got to own properties. You have to like build your troops or deploy a preset limited amount in a conflict. Manage your funds, your income, and stuff like that. So it's not entirely.
Here's the question that I would pose to you. So obviously limited complexity can be good, but one thing that it does do is diminish replay value. So do you think that if you played the game now, I'm not going to ask if you would find it as enjoyable, because obviously that answer is no, because nostalgia, right? But right. But if you were to play it now, do you think that it would maintain your interest for a long period of time?
I know it did, because one summer I went back in college, and I was just hanging around doing nothing before camp starting, and I found my old Game Boy Advance, and somehow it's still working. I'm wondering if I could sell it to a collector at this point in time. I
think I did the exact same thing with Age of Mythology. Like, I randomly played it in college. I played against the one person who was still online, because that was the cool thing about it. You could play online with other people.
Oh. Yeah, back in the day of the Game Boy Advance, you couldn't play online. You had to play wired connection, where you like plug your Game Boy Advance into someone else's Game Boy Advance to play. Yeah. But this one was fun too, because it was turn-based, so you could just pass the Game Boy Advance around and play it. So that's what I would do, is I just play with like 3 people, and we just pass it back and forth, and it'd be like a really good way to occupy like long car rides and stuff like that.
Very cool. Definitely the car ride argument, strong argument in its favor, right? Because even though like Age of Mythology was, like, I would say, I mean, I don't know your game, but I would be shocked if it was more complicated or visually arresting than this game, right? But that was also because it was on a computer and therefore less portable.
Right. I mean, you're gonna beat me on the like tiny Game Boy Advance, which had probably the processing power of like 1/20th of my iPhone. So,
well, it really is not possible for us to come to a definitive conclusion on this one. But I did enjoy. What was the name of your game?
It's called Advance Wars. There's a series of it. There's like probably 4 or 5 Advance Wars. The ones that I was playing was the one that I highly recommend.
You can probably get a version of Age of Mythology on your computer for like 50 cents. It's so fun.
No, I found an emulator online and played it on my computer for like months.
You don't mean Age of Mythology?
My game. Yeah, I found an emulator for it.
Yeah.
It was free. So
I actually highly recommend that you look up Age of Mythology. It is great.
All right,
it's many hours of gameplay.
I'm not sure if there's no winner here, but at least I learned something.
Yeah. Unfortunately, it's a draw. How about this? If any of you all have experienced any of these glacially old games, I doubt you have, but if you have, send us an email to the argumentclinicpodcast@gmail.com, and we'll shout you out on the next episode. Say, like, shout out to this person who played Age of Mythology, whatever. That's your name now, this person. Anyway, thank you all for staying with us. This has been episode 29 of the Argument Clinic podcast. Until the next episode, everyone, stay frosty.
No, this isn't an argument.
Yes, it is.
No, it isn't. It's just contradiction.
No, it isn't.
Yes, it is.
It is not.